You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, my guest is a gentleman whom I've had the pleasure of sitting in on his show, and he is now sitting in on mine. His name is Nico Venne. Nico, welcome to the show, friend.
Thank you so much, Doug, for having me. Been looking forward to it.
We had a great and robust talk last time, as I recall, and Nico has a couple of focal areas that I think are significant for our purposes here when we think about the concept of how can you be a leader and how can you operate with some common sense. But one particular area in his background that strikes my fancy is a thing that he calls Founderitis. And Nico, if we can, I'd like to start with that, and I'm sure that's going to lead us in another direction. But without leading the witness here, how do you describe Founderitis, and what is that about?
It's I kind of compare it to a certain form of disease that doesn't give off the easy symptoms that you can detect. Like, when you have a cold, you start coughing, you have a runny nose, but Founderitis is something that it pops up and your environment knows that you have it, but you yourself don't always know it. Of course, it's not a real disease. I'll make that very clear, but it's more a series of symptoms that a founder has at some point in their business career where their leadership switches over to something that is a lot more blocking for their company than promoting for their company. And one of those symptoms, and there's several of them, and I've got an ebook on that, and they're all described in it. One of them is either isolation or micromanagement or not willing to change. So a couple of those. And that's where Founderitis is kind of coming from. Or there are other terms that are used for it. It's also called founder syndrome, for instance. But I like Founderitis a little bit better, seeing the context of the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, and for those who work in an entrepreneurial space, it's very prevalent as the business gets a little bigger and other forces dictate some change in things. Typically, when a company gets bigger, other investors are involved, other shareholders get involved, even though it might be private money, and they want to have a voice at the table. So whether it's an advisory board or a formal board of directors, there's a little bit more governance and direction over what that founder gets to do, but that doesn't mean you're immune to Founderitis. It can create some great conflict for some. I'll quickly state where I see it pop up is inevitably in that small business where the founder came to market with a great idea, a great concept, did in fact create some traction and created a market niche for that service or that product to enter. And if the company scales and grows up to a certain level, and there's a lot of different theories on what the stages of growth in a small business may be. I've heard as few as 3 phases. I've heard as many as 7, and there's a lot in between, and they're all good arguments. But inevitably, they come to an impasse where that founder, essentially, and no disrespect intended, but they're struggling to get out of their own way to allow the business to continue to grow. I actually named it the paradox of success when I observed it in my banking days, when I watched really good companies grow to a certain level and then implode because the founder was not going to the next logical step, the next logical progression. And sometimes that step is you got to fire yourself as the CEO and allow somebody else to come in and be your CEO. You can maintain your ownership and stay in the seat of visionary for the business, kind of coming up with the new ideas and innovations, but you need somebody else executing on the delivery of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those classic ideas where you see, let's take, for instance, a plumber. It's one of the easiest way to explain it, which is pretty close to an experience with a customer of mine. There were two partners in a plumbing business, and they both, did the classic installations, and they came to a point where they said, okay, we need to employ somebody. The business starts growing, and at some point, they're actually running around with like 40, 50 people, and they themselves are installing and managing the business at the same time. So usually one of the first things that comes in is an administrative support. That's like kind of a basic thing that everybody starts doing, and then maybe somebody for sales and so on, because they want to continue growing. And then suddenly the founder comes to a point where they say, okay, I can't do installations anymore. I have too much stuff to do within the company. Now that's the point where you can start asking yourself some questions. Is this really what I want to do as the founder? Or do I need some kind of middle management? Now, there's a danger with implementing a middle management, because a lot of your employees are used to being empowered and to do what needs to be done to make the company run as well. So what I usually also kind of flag up is, don't take away too much responsibility from your people either. But as a founder, you come to that point where you're like, okay, I cannot do the installations. I need to manage the company at the same time. I have a lot of employees, and employees equals issues. Just be realistic about that. In any kind of form that you are clearly seeing or not seeing. And, there's always a little bit of a veil in front of a founder when it comes to reality. There are people who run away from problems. There are people who run towards problems, and that depends. But at that point, then it is really like looking at yourself in the mirror and asking yourself, what in essence, why did I start my company? And where do I want to go with this company? And that's like you said, Doug, where you come into a point where you said, okay, I'm going to fire myself as a leader and become an advisory role for my own company. And that's where boards come in, and indeed all those layers. Is it always necessary to do that? It depends on the size of your company, of course, and your own dreams, because sometimes you can actually overrun yourself. I've seen people come to a point where they actually wanted to see themselves grow to only like 10 employees. And they said, stop right there. It's still manageable for me, so I can do these things. But yeah, it's just a reality, and it's good to grow, but grow in a good way.
Well, and yeah, you raise a good point. Let's be fair. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the entrepreneur that wants to build what I like to call a lifestyle business. They want to grow it up to a certain level that doesn't consume any more than whatever magic number of hours in the week they want to invest. And by the way, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, there's no such thing as a 40-hour work week. Let's just get that off the table.
Yeah, that's a no-go.
It seldom ever happens. It's a nice notion, and you can usually figure out maybe how to get close to that, but that's the point. Most entrepreneurs do work hard to build a business up to a certain dollar value so that they're receiving a income that fulfills some expectation they've got about lifestyle. That's why I call it a lifestyle business. But they don't see themselves going bigger than that because they just don't want the headaches. They don't want the hassles and responsibilities that go. And it can well be exponential challenges as you continue to grow if you're not doing everything the best way possible. And nobody's perfect. So suffice it to say, there's going to be something that happens at that next level that makes it a challenge. And I see this a lot in the work I've been doing the last year and a half, where I am dealing in the space where businesses are being sold by the founder and a new buyer is coming in, taking over. And, that transition runs the full gamut of I've seen sellers who, when the reality of walking away hits them, they change their mind. They really don't want to walk away. And
Yeah.
therefore the deals end up caving in. I've seen others who have done a reasonably good job of building a nice, healthy lifestyle business. And again, no disrespect, but it's got a certain revenue level and that's all they wanted. They don't want to go bigger than that. But the owner, the new buyer, comes in and says, I like what you've done with this. You've laid a beautiful foundation. I think I can 2X or 3X this business, and that's what I want to do. So now the employees that are left behind in the transition are scratching their head, sometimes in a good way, sometimes not so good. And the new owner is discovering, well, certain things didn't happen because the founder had a mindset and had a way to do things. And even though the employees out in the field were finding better ways, the owner didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to agree that that's what could be done or could be different. And I've had multiple opportunities to go do some team workshops with new buyers that have moved in and had the business for like 60 days. And now they take their key people and we go do a 1-day workshop and we talk about the future of the business. Without fail, there are always ideas on the table that never got entertained before. But these are people that have been out in the field doing the work, and your analogy of the plumbing company is a great example. And, something like, how do we stock the trucks with parts to know that we're ready to go on the jobs? Well, the original founder might have had one idea about what kind of an investment in inventory they're going to make for parts. And he might have had a practice of, well, if you run into a problem, run down to Home Depot and get a new part. Well, that's costly. You lose time, and there's just a lot of issues with that strategy. So some of those transitional type ideas really can go straight to the bottom line in a very fast way.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the conversations that I did have on my show as well was with Sani Abdul-Jabbar, and he's a tech magnate in Silicon. And one of his points that he gave was he was starting a business and it was running pretty smooth, but at some point he came to a mandatory leave, so he needed to go somewhere, and he knew beforehand that he needed to do it. So he hired somebody externally, which was, they ran a parallel for a while, and then suddenly he left his company for 3 to 4 months. And when he came back, what he noticed was, so he had a pipeline, so a sales pipeline, sorry for maybe explain that coming from a plumbing company. But anyway, so he had a sales pipeline which was full, but he never got to the point where the customers actually bought from him. And by going away 3 months, coming back, the pipeline was completely empty. So the external person actually was able to bring the story in a different way with different ideas and sold out to all those customers in that pipeline. And it's one of those examples, like you said, that the founder has a certain vision on how he explains his sales pitch or whatever, and then somebody else comes in, gives you new ideas, and your business might flow even better. And that's indeed kind of the veil that starts to be created by thinking, I've always done it this way and it's worked, so why not keep on doing it? And that's one of the biggest symptoms that founderitis can bring on, or even CEO disease, because that happens at that level as well. But it's very important to listen to all kinds of opinions, still make your own, of course, out of it. But once you start talking about what's going on in your business, and that's one of the core things that I do in my coaching as well, is I listen to the stories that a founder tells me. And coming from those stories, I start asking them questions on, okay, so you did it this way, and you're seeing that it's running smooth, but could it be smoother? Or what are you missing to, even it out into a process that might even be done by, let's say, a monkey, for instance, just a bit extreme, but it might be a possibility. And you see, I love the twinkle in the eyes when people get an insight. That's what we do it for.
Right.
And that's kind of what happens at that point, because you live in a certain perspective of your world, and somebody needs to pull you out of that. And that's where Founderitis or CEO to Zero, or any other kind of thing might help you get the insight of how can I make my business better? If you even want to, of course, like you said, you can always keep to a certain level. But to be honest, one of our sayings here is if you don't think forward, you're stepping backward. A business does need to grow. It's kind of like a living organism. If you don't feed it with the right way, it'll stall, and you'll probably get just enough out of it. But after a while, you'll get bored or see that it's not good or something happens, and it goes on like that. And then an external buyer can be a very big impact on what you always had in mind for your business. Yeah.
Well, I like what you brought up here, because the business world, the buying market around you, the way consumer behavior changes, it is changing. And if a founder doesn't stay on top of that or stay up with it, to your point, the old methods are eventually potentially going to stop working. And if you say you've got a business and you're relying on word of mouth to get your next job in the pipeline, well, buying habits may have changed. Your ideal customer maybe is, quite honestly, not as social as they once were. So they're not talking to people. They're just Googling their inquiries. Now they may rely on social reviews and the social proof that come from posted reviews. But if you haven't done anything with your business to solicit those reviews and get those postings, they may find you. But if you don't have any reviews, they're going to go, well, this company must not do much. I'm going to page on, skip, next, and you've lost that opportunity. So it is a changing world. And again, that's where I see a lot of potential in what are good businesses that might be up for sale, that a new buyer can come in and do some pretty simple implementation of some things. I don't want to get too far off on one tangent, but for any of the service businesses, like you mentioned, plumbing, it's true with heating and air, it's true with electrical, even remodeling and landscaping and some other things. There's this beautiful idea called geofencing, where if you are going to spend dollars in Google ad, you can define the area where you want your ad appearing, and it can be a literal geographic fence around a dot on the map. Mm-hmm. And where I've seen it leverage the best is a service company that knows they've got a project out in the neighborhood, and they're saying, basically, I know my trucks are going to be at this address for the next 5 days. Well, they can tweak the geocode in Google to only display ads in a 5-mile radius around that map point of that address. Now, you're not divulging your customer per se, but Google is driving that geography. And your ad dollars are only getting spent in that circle around that dot. So somebody's sitting at home going, gee, I think I need to call a plumber. Let me Google, and there's an ad pop up for Ajax Plumbing. That's your truck. And that truck is driving around that neighborhood that day. And the person goes out running another errand and says, oh man, I just Googled that. Look at that truck. They're right here. I need to call him. See? And that you get this weird psychology going on and being triggered by the presence of the truck and the visibility of the ad. And it all comes together in a very good way. So, but that's kind of a new frontier for most business owners. Nobody even knows what geofencing is about, and they're just blowing dollars on ad spend if they're even doing that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I kind of like as well in the context is whereas a lot of these service companies have been used to being the experts in what they do. An electrician comes into your house, and you're saying, I want a lamp right there. And they're saying, hold on, sir, that's right on top of, a water fountain or something like that, we're going to say, no, we're not going to do that. But these days, people do research beforehand, and they come in and they are going to explain to you how you are going to do your job. And there's a lot of companies that are not adapted to that mentality yet. So they become the expert who going to conflict with customers and then end up losing the customer because they sound like they don't want to listen or anything like that. And I've seen this happen in a few smaller businesses, and it was even in a perfume company, perfume shop, or a lingerie shop, or even a plumber. So it was really diverse. There was a lady who explained to me where she came into a perfume store, and she knew exactly what she wanted as a scent, and she knew the model or the brand and everything. And she went to the cashier and she said, "I want this perfume." And the cashier knew that it was one of the cheapest versions. She wanted to, upsell, and she started adapting herself to looking at, okay, the customer is very convinced about this product, but what else can we offer? And she started switching over to a more broader view of saying, oh, so you like the perfume? What if the lipstick goes with your perfume? Because of course your day would be much better when somebody looks at you, smells you, sees what you look like, and so on and so on. So she switched it over to, okay, customer, you might be an expert in this thing, but I can attach that and that and that. And the same thing happened with the lingerie store as well, where somebody came in with a certain mindset of I want this, but they added a lot of other stuff to it. And that's something that is very much changing in the consumer environment these days, is where people are a lot more aware of what the possibilities are. Where, you used to come into what do you call it? Somebody who made the nice costumes or suits into a suit store, and you would have the idea, I want a suit, but you had no idea of color or size or whatever. These days, people walk in and they know exactly, even to the fabric and the amount of cotton or whatever it's in there. And that's where a lot of businesses, they can't switch that. It's kind of,
Right.
we're the shop, we know what we're doing. No, you don't. Basically, yes, you do, but act like you don't.
Well, along that same line, my family doctor has a poster in all of his examination rooms that says, "The success of your treatment depends on which one of us is the doctor."
That's a good one.
And that's that subtle dig for, I know you've already Googled these symptoms and you've got an idea what you got, but let's put that aside for a minute. Let me do my thing. I'm the doctor, and
Absolutely.
let's see what you've really got. And I can only imagine, their frustration, people coming in saying, I know I've got this, I need this medicine. Well, maybe you don't have that. Hold on. It's,
Yeah, we might have something else there.
but you raise a good point, particularly in the more broader categories, perhaps, of like home repair, home services, even other consumer goods. People get pretty specific about what they've got, and of course, if it is a product, well, they can just buy it online if they want to, and leave a human interaction out of the whole thing. So that's perhaps another whole different discussion we'll save for another day. But so let me ask you, let's go back to Founderitis. What does an owner who might be suffering, and at least to their credit, they've admitted they're struggling with that, and they're asking, how do I move on? What do you typically do? How do you start with a client who's raising that question?
The first thing that happens is they have to, when they realize that something's wrong, they have to know what's wrong. And that's where a conversation is one of the tipping points where a lot of insights start. My goal is I ask one of the, mostly very annoying questions that they don't want to answer. And it kind of triggers them into a point where they're like, do I actually know what I'm doing right now? You kind of push them over a limit and really I sometimes put a little bit of salt in the wound, make it a little bit extreme and go like, okay, what if you continue doing what you're doing right now? Where would you end up in 20 years or 10 years? Your business is running, you don't change anything, what would happen? They usually would be very positive about that story, but then you come down to the details and say, okay, but you are, in that mindset right now, and the economy changes and the environment changes and so on and so on. So I go into that conversation and trigger to the point where they realize what really is the cause. And that's digging deep, the 7-point questions and stuff like that, where you really go in deep. And I have had conversations where I'm a confidant. So in essence, I am not allowed to tell anybody else what's being discussed in my practice. And that's a very good thing, because the people have a lot more trust in what I will do. And I also provoke. So it happens that they start shouting and become angry or become a different emotion. And that's the point where I know that they're actually breaking through the barrier of their own block. And that's where the story actually starts. And we start working from there to a point where, well, it's about implementation, isn't it? It's not about, just let's have a 2-hour chat and that's it. Now you know what you need to do. No, it's about continuously having a conversation that is confidential, that is between two people, that also needs to go somewhere. That's the whole point. So the founder needs to leave my office with a clear action list of what am I going to do to make myself, cured from Founderitis. And of course, you need to first find which symptom you're really on. And there are always multiple ones. It's not one. Usually it's multiple. But that's where it starts. Yeah.
And if I may, I'll add to that. I think something that's vital that owners need to consider is you did mention asking some questions, and it starts with your team being willing to periodically ask them, how do you like working here? What's good about what's going on here, and what gives you trouble? What are you concerned about? In some companies, the culture that has bubbled up is conducive to having that discussion, but sometimes the founders created a culture where there's not enough trust, and people are afraid of answering that question honestly. And you'll hear things like, "Oh, it's good, boss. It's good. No worries." If that's the kind of answer you're getting, to me, I would caution and encourage you to consider that a red flag. It's probably not so good if you can dig a little deeper and find out more. And I know one business coach advisor, he also encourages people to have those discussions with their customers. Why do you like buying from us? Why do you like using us? Why have you stayed with us? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the answers to that are surprising. It's not always best price, but maybe it is reliability or response time or problem solving, because not all deliveries work properly. Not all project execution happens cleanly. But sometimes a company can make a better reputation out of how they fix things than what they deliver in the first place.
True. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the whole thing is there that from my point of view, what I've experienced is I start with the founders, so the person themselves, as in realizing that there's something wrong. And from there on, you kind of create different circles around the person. What's the first impression? The only thing that you can influence is yourself. That's the only thing that you can actually really influence. And then you go a little bit further. So who's around you? Who's really close to you? And who do you trust to just, say whatever they want to say, and you're going to be sure that they're going to say it. So indeed, it's working around a certain strategy wherein you have all these different layers, and at some point, the onion becomes so big that you know exactly what's inside the onion, and that's the whole thing, isn't it? That's where the improvement can actually start becoming very valuable.
Right.
Indeed.
And as you were saying that, I was thinking of an example. I have seen a company recently that was sold by a good owner, a guy that was a bit of a visionary in his own right, had built a very healthy business. But again, he had kind of capped out, and it was by choice. He didn't want to get a lot bigger than he was, but he had assembled a team of key people, and most of these people had worked for him 10, 15, a couple of them 20 years and beyond. So there was a good culture of fulfillment and work relationships that was going on. They liked each other, they trusted each other, they worked hard together. But when the buyer came in and took over, and the founder seller sort of slowly started walking away, and we opened up the discussions about, well, let's talk about the real essence of this business. How do things get done? What are opportunities? There were still those ideas like, we could do this a little bit different over here, and maybe we could do something over here, and maybe we could start calling those people over there. We've never called them because the former owner didn't want to go there. He didn't want to get any bigger. He didn't want to work any harder. And it's those kind of opportunities that can bubble up for a potential new owner going in if they ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And again, it's a very delicate balance. You don't want to be critical of the person that sold you the business because they've worked hard and it's been a good, healthy business up to that point of sale. But at the same time, you want to start plotting a course for maybe making it bigger. 20% gain here, year over year, pretty soon. If a business grows 15% every year for 5 years, it will double. You just do the math on that, and 15% gain year over year is a doubling of the business in 5 years. So and that would be a healthy growth trajectory for any kind of business.
Yeah, some serious compounding right there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Nico, I think we're about up on time, my friend. This has been great. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more.
Well, I would say go to Doug's website first, and then go to LinkedIn, look for Doug, look in his contacts and find me there. Or just go to LinkedIn and find me on LinkedIn with my name. That's the easiest way.
That's great. Well, we always have links in the show notes, people that you can check out when you do get the posting of this episode. And this is the time of the show I like to say we do have a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. If you've enjoyed the audio stream you might be listening to, hop over there, check out the video, and see what else we've got in the archive there. But one last time, Nico, thank you, man. Really appreciate you sitting in.
Likewise, it's been enjoyable. It's always wonderful talking to you, Doug. Learn a lot, and I'm inspired.
Well, thank you. I think that's about it for today, folks. I think we've got all the business things tied up. Don't forget, I'm on the web at dougthorpe.com. You can get links for all of my coaching programs and advisory services there. And of course, I thank you for your continued following on the podcast here. But with that, we are going to say goodbye. Go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.